Presenting now is Grace Olaoluwa from the University of Lagos. Grace Olaoluwa holds a doctorate degree in music, musicology specialization from Stellenbosch University, South Africa. She currently lectures in the music unit of the Creative Arts Department, University of Lagos. Her research interests include interdisciplinary studies, musical art practices in Africa, creative/artistic research, and African art music scholarship. More recently, she has been actively involved in the Digital Return Project with African Cluster of Excellence, working on projects and research around appropriation, documentation, and digitization of music heritage materials, and especially ways in which these materials can engage critically as knowledge production base, yielding new forms of cultural creation for a sustainable national development in Nigeria. Please welcome Grace Olaoluwa as she presents Beyond the Margins, Reevaluating the Autonomy of African Art Music.
Allow me to read a bit of my abstract to, put this work into focus. The cultivation of African art music could be considered to originate in the systems of thought and education imposed by colonialism and Christian missions at the turn of the 20th century, inserting Europe as a pervasive influence in the contemporary African musical heritage. This paper challenges the notion of African art music compositions and works as just as mere appendages to European art music, with specific reference to cantatas. It examines the distinctive transformation of the cantata music genre across various Western musical periods, vis-a-vis its Nigerian conceptions, also across generations of art music composers. Through a critical analysis of Western, historical, and contemporary Nigerian art music practice of the genre, this paper reviews the unique cultural, aesthetics, and philosophical underpinnings of African art music. It argues that musical compositions by Africans, specifically Nigerians here, remains untethered, serving a wide range and aesthetically plural sets of practices which demonstrates the autonomy and agency of African art music. The findings suggest that African art music is not merely a derivative or peripheral phenomenon, but rather a vibrant and dynamic tradition that deserves recognition and appreciation in its own right. This study contributes to the ongoing debates on decolonization and post-colonialism, offering new insights and a deeper understanding of African art music and its place within the global musical landscape. All right, so thank you. That's the abstract to the work. I do not promise to cover all of this because it's still an ongoing work, but the introduction I start with, African art music in Nigeria is a discursive construct by important scholars and composers who have tried to forge various understanding not only of the music thought as of comprising various concepts, but also of how this music relates to various other forms of colonial musical inheritance in interaction with indigenous Nigerian musical traditions. I'll give some definitions around African art music. Inketia, of course, as divine African art music, as works that manifest the attributes, craftsmanship, aesthetic goals, concepts and techniques of Western art music with the values of its own context of creativity rooted in traditions of Africa. He adds that African variety of art music could be developed by individual composers in different parts of Africa from sources in their own country. But Deomojola also, in his book, Nigerian art music, extends this view by ascertaining that the most important objective of art music composers is to help create a tradition of, Nigerian art music through a fusion of African and European elements. Well, in this sense, Africa manifests um, Africa manifests what I would call in the individuality of the art music composers over and the extended development of more general theories and stylistic practices. Slide. Okay, so I also want to point out Kofi Agau's assertion to this, which says that the interest of African art music should actually be Africa's engagement with modernity, which in reality serves a wide-ranging and aesthetically plural set of practices. Well, methodologically, the framework for this study, I would say, is a historical research. Of course, qualitative. And the aim is to investigate as well as interrogate how cantata music became a suitable form for artistic and critical expression practiced in Nigeria. This paper reveals, the unique cultural aesthetics and philosophical underpinnings of African art music. And above all, it argues that, African art music, like Kofi Agawu enunciated, remains untethered, serving a wide range and aesthetically plural sets of practices. I go to the historical overview of the cantata. This will serve more like an history class because, of course, I teach Western music history, and I've taught this course for over the years. And some questions keep coming up in my mind about why we really want to pin certain things to certain regions or people, when actually in the Western sense, there is a flux. It keeps changing, it keeps moving. And we cannot, take away the colonial influence from ours. So, well, throughout history, one thing that has remained constant about the term cantata is that it has been applied haphazardly to connote musical works of variety of styles and forms. Cantata takes its name from an Italian word originally meant a piece to be sung, which began as a secular vocal genre in the 17th century Rome. Okay, so although previously used by various poets and composers to refer to certain solo pieces, it was first appellated to an exclusive collection of works by Alessandro Gaddi, cantatas and arias for solo voices, published between 1620 and 1627. Cantata grew from the ambitious monodic vocal styles of the 16th century madrigal through its development both in Italy as in the rest of Europe, most notably Germany, France, Spain, and England. It took various forms, names, and styles, having first been conceptualized as vocal solo works with ostinato-based accompaniments. Cantata grew into duos, trios, and choruses. With the rise of instrumental works, different instruments began to be added from continued to obligato instrument, and later even to full orchestra. Italy remained important in the development of the cantata as composers and poets experimented on early forms and styles. Most European countries where cantata became prominent from the mid 18th century onwards drew on their own regional styles and traditions, even though they still modeled their composition on development in Italy. Cantatas became a powerful tool for expression and the evocation of, mental images. Its text, some satirical or humorous, some others more serious, ranged across many different topics. Some were expressive of sexual love, some dealt with historical or mythological legends, while significant proportions were about moral and devotional subjects. A prominent structural feature of the cantata from the late 17th to 18th century was the alternation between recitative and the aria, which became standardized as a sequence of 2 to 3 da capo arias. The sacred cantata only dates from the late 17th century when new elements derived from secular and opera, secular cantata and opera filtered into church music. Sacred cantata, as known in Italy, also known in Italy as cantata da chiesa, literally meaning church cantata, were set to devotional text and were cultivated predominantly in Germany to a lesser extent in other European countries. Sacred cantata attained the height of its expression in Bach's composition. The church cantata in Germany became defined in terms of its functions as the principal music of the Lutheran service and in terms of its structure as a vocal work comprising a number of relatively independent movements. Okay, so the typical characteristic of secular cantata, which the complexities, excessive use of coloratura, most times obscures the text. From the 19th century onwards, the term cantata was applied ever more loosely to describe a wide variety of works, especially for choruses and orchestra, and sometimes with few solo voices. And they became also to be used as sorry, is that timer coming lesser or faster? All right, so let me go to the Nigerian conception. Okay, so I go to the Nigerian conception. Okay, so I would want to end with the 19th century Western art form of the cantata to say that the cantata became, very loosely used, that it became now like competitions. For example, in France, there was this Prix de Rome where they usually just set, criteria for compositions. And so cantatas, generally lost its um, basics for in the academic circle, cantatas occupied a place where aspirants had to follow strict prescriptions based on the competition category. This changed, the conception of the cantata, and a lot of composers like Britain, thank you, you know, wrote a number of Britain's academica written to celebrate the 500th anniversary of Basel University in 1960, Bartok's Cantata Profana, and where they use different forms, just expressing their musical, expertise and what you call. So it was not pinned down to a particular style. I would talk about the Nigerian conception of the cantata. In Nigeria, the earliest compositions with titles linked to the cantata were written for festival celebrations. I really wanted to talk about, composers like Ayo Bankole, how he conceived this cantata. These were composers who wielded influence at certain time in Nigerian history. Cantata number 4, Festa Cantata number 4. I actually plan to play that. Also, now looking down to like the fourth generation composers like Dayo Oyedun, whom I worked extensively on in my doctoral thesis. He viewed it more like the secular form and what the cantata would mean to them. And this came from various, like Sam Akpabot's cantata. I think I should read what I gave various analyses of this cantata by the Nigerian composers. How do I? Okay, so Sam Akpabot also was commissioned by Festac 7 to write this cantata, and these were his words. Akpabot gave a long note on his cantata Weber Christi, where he said this cantata was commissioned by the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation for the Black Arts Festival held in Lagos, Nigeria on November 25 through December 20, 1975. The dramatic nature of the words has always held special fascination for me, and for the first 12 words in the opening sentence. So basically, he gave, how the cantata to him was more of inspirational, and how he had to, arrange the 12 words of Christ, and using the 12 tone systems, and how he had to like even include choruses that were outside of all of this, maybe from his church. So in writing sacred cantata, a wide variety of diverse styles from Europe and Africa, marking a shift from the interest in writing music, exploring predominantly African traditional materials and elements from high life music, traditional music, all sorts, to bring out his creative ingenuity in the work. And from these early examples, it then emerges that the cantata was viewed in Nigeria as a flexible genre capable of incorporating a wide variety of influences. According to Oyedun, the term cantata for him had become untethered to the very idea of it, and he actually felt that he was even, doing writing cantata from the very origins of it. But from my analysis of his work, I still see it being linked to the 19th century conception. Thank you. Of the term. The conception and the use of art forms cantata in Nigeria reveals a remarkable and clearly differentiated consumption of Western music in interaction with local Nigerian taste that speaks not only to composers and concert programmers' sensibility. Already in 1975, Akenyuba asserted that it was the obligation of the cantata historically and how it has become a part of Nigerian musical expression. The international transformation of the idea of cantata, of the idea of what a cantata could be as opposed to its 18th century form, happened to coincide with the development of Western art music in Nigeria, which dates from the mid-19th century. My argument is that the colonial encounter and the influence of church missionaries refract the aesthetics and context of European cantata in unexpected and different ways in their new West Africa and specifically Nigerian context. Cantata compositions in Nigeria were mainly sacred works, whereas Oyedun's cantata were, secular you know, comparing the correlations I explained earlier, examining a number of cantatas by Nigerian composers, and drawing on stylistic and structural similarities and differences from Western models, I make the argument that the idea of the cantata transforms in a dynamic relationship on to how ideas or conception of art music practices in Nigeria are established. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, our friends and colleagues, I know you have questions for Dr. Grace. Please, you're welcome to ask, or perhaps you have any suggestion. So the floor is yours. You have any?
So I noticed you began your history of the cantata, and I wonder if you find out how much of that history influenced their thinking.
Okay, thank you.
There, yeah.
Well, I'll take it from there. Let me talk about Oyedun, whom I was privileged to interview. I transcribed a whole lot of his sayings about this. Yes. Um, so there was a part I didn't talk about. Churches who use the word also loosely, just as a form of a catchy, oh, cantata, we have this cantata performance in December, Easter, and, you know, loosely, and sometimes you cannot find the links to what cantata means. But to art composers who are intentional about their writings, their compositions, a composer like Oyedun, who is even self-taught and was, you know, grew from the church, not so academically inclined like we would study, you know, these kinds of art forms. He once told me that, yeah, I'm doing it like it is. I mean, from the historical origins. And it's the historical origin of the cantata is secular form. No, in Nigeria, it's just sacred, sacred. You know, churches talk about, when they say cantata, you're thinking of church performance. And really, if we also look at the, you know, conception in Nigeria from earliest composers, it's always also been from the German linkage of the sacred form. So, but in my conclusion, looking at it, analyzing many of his works, I do think that it's linked tenuously to the loosely haphazard use of the term from the 19th century. And all of these are linked to Christian missionaries bringing all of these art forms to Nigerians, and that's way. Also, if I would look at the structural elements of works like these composers who spoke to me in this way, I would also see, you know, more of the, you know, tonal language linking more to church music, you know, music of the 18th century, basically. So, and I would ask him, so why is there no orchestration, all of this in your work? He said, you know, I work from the question to the answer. Just as I said, I work from the question to the answer. All I have done is a piano reduction of the work, or what they call piano compression. So I could just assign somebody musically sound who knows all of these instruments to do the orchestration and all of this. So that's from someone like that. There was also a cantata I watched back in Mountain on Fire Ministry in 2019, and these works were put together by the music director of their school, the conservatory, and it was almost a 45 minutes performance. And I was in that church that day to watch, you know, this performance. So it was just a whole lot of music compositions that linked to the Bible stories that had no, so it wasn't just, so these are the various ways these things have been used. But back to your question, composers like Oyedun seem to say he understands the history, but I, from music history academic angle, would say it still links to the haphazard use of this term, which really is more like what African art music is. People just want to write and want to express themselves, and it boils back to the question Professor Omojola asked yesterday, that at what point can we say that we would have a distinctive language in art music? And all of the analysis he gave, that it still boils down to the individuality of the composers, and we cannot separate the environment of the composers or from his musical choices and all of these things. Thank you, sir. Yeah, identity. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So we have 4 minutes left. So do we have questions perhaps online? Let's see if our... Okay, Pro. Grace, I'm sorry. So don't feel that way. As you was talking, I just went to my book and saw what I wrote about some Akpabot Baba Christie. And I think that what you might want to do, as Professor Agawa said, is to focus on Nigeria. There's something wrong in some kind of historical background about European thing. And look at how the word cantata has been interpreted in various ways. When I was growing up in Ado-Ekiti, they used to say we were having a cantata. But it had nothing to do with the real cantata. If we had a service where hymns were sung about the birth of Jesus Christ, they just call it a cantata. And it looks like Oyedun has done remarkable work about cantata. So maybe focusing on Nigeria and see how the cantata has been interpreted in diverse ways, and rather than an elaborate thing on Western music, and then do it. I don't know how much work you want to do on cantata in Nigeria, and do a focus study on the cantata in Nigeria from the relatively informal navigation of the concept to maybe then looking at maybe a work like some Akpabot and then Oyedun, and see how they contrast with one another. So more focused on Nigeria and seeing specifically how that historical compositional concept has been interpreted in Nigeria. That would be great. So this, you said so that it's an ongoing research, and this is the beginning. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
In addition to what Prof said, I may just want you to look at Ogunde's works. He actually, when he started theater, his Christmas, Carol, Easter period performances, largely they use the word Ogunde cantata presentations. So it was actually different clips of performances. So you may want to interrogate that in addition to what Prof said, based on Nigerian factor and context of use of the word cantata. As a theater student, I read about cantata performances, and from the history you gave, there's a kind of departure that may assist your work.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we have 1 minute. Okay.
All right, thank you for that paper, the good presentation. I just want to add this. Oyedun is not just self-taught. Oyedun had some form of music education, starting with his father, then to his music teacher, then eventually he had a diploma, I think in ABRSM or something. He's a friend, so I know a little of that. So please, he's not just self-taught. That's where I'm going. Just try and check.
All right,
that
so
one.
let me just add to that, because I wrote extensively on that too. In fact, all of his origins from all of these beginnings. So there's a term, not really educated in the way we would say that. I mean, that you've got ABRSM, you write professional exams, doesn't make you a scholar in that sense. So, but I get what you're saying. Thank you. Yeah, he's got education, but he was self-taught in many sense, and that's something you may just refer to my doctoral thesis in that respect, please. Thank you. Any other question?
Thank you so much, Dr. Grace. Can we give a round of applause? Thank you so much.